My best friend shrugged and said, "It's only one mistake, don't ruin your future." So I pressed play on the recording and smiled. The wedding's canceled, but the truth is just getting started. I was 3 days from getting married when I realized I had no idea who I had built my life around. That sounds dramatic now, but at the time it felt stupidly practical. I was just trying to keep the wedding on track, keep work from falling apart, and keep myself from freaking out over a few details that did not quite line up. I had spent almost a year believing I was just stressed. Looking back, I should have trusted that feeling sooner. My fiancée, Emily, and I had been together for almost 6 years. We had one of those relationships that looked boring from the outside in the best possible way. We split groceries, argued about where to order takeout, complained about traffic, and spent weekends doing normal married people things before we were even married. We had a house. We had a dog. We had a wedding fund. We had all the practical stuff people use to convince themselves a relationship is solid. My best friend, Ryan, had been in my life since high school. He was the guy who showed up to my graduation, moved furniture with me, helped me replace a busted water heater, and stood next to me when my dad got diagnosed with cancer. If Ryan asked me for help, I usually gave it before he finished explaining. If Emily needed something, Ryan was the kind of friend who would drive across town and not make it weird. That was the whole problem. Nobody looked suspicious when they were acting like family. The first thing that felt off was money. Emily handled most of the wedding planning because I was working stupid hours, and she actually enjoyed checking details. I did the budget and paid the vendors. I had one spreadsheet that tracked deposits, due dates, and final balances down to the dollar. I am the kind of guy who gets weirdly calm when numbers make sense, so I trusted the spreadsheet more than my memory. About 10 months before the wedding, I noticed a charge I did not recognize. It was not huge, just under $400, but it was listed under a hotel I had never heard of. I asked Emily about it, and she said it was for a block of rooms for out-of-town family. That sounded reasonable. A few days later, the same hotel showed up again, this time for a different amount. Then another charge from a furniture outlet across town. Then a payment to a storage unit company. I did not accuse anyone. I just took screenshots and saved them in a folder on my laptop. I had learned a long time ago that if you get emotional too fast, people start talking about your tone instead of the actual problem. Emily said the furniture was for our future guest room, and the storage unit was for wedding decor we did not have space for yet. Ryan had been helping her because he had a truck and apparently was the only person who could lift anything heavier than a throw pillow without acting like he needed a break. All of that made sense in pieces. It just stopped making sense when I put the pieces next to each other. There were always explanations. That was what made it hard, not one giant lie. A bunch of little ones that seemed plausible enough when you only looked at them one by one. The first time I felt embarrassed for even wondering about it was at a family dinner at my parents' house. Emily had her phone face down on the table, which she never used to do around me. Ryan was there too, because he had stopped by after helping her pick up table decorations. He sat a little too close to her on the couch, but not enough that anybody would say anything out loud. My mom was talking about centerpieces, my sister was asking whether we had confirmed the photographer, and I was trying to act normal while watching Ryan laugh at a text he had apparently gotten from Emily. I saw the screen light up for a second. It was only a split second, but it was enough to make me uneasy. His message preview showed her name and the words about keeping quiet until after. I pretended I had not seen it. I told myself I was probably reading too much into a cropped notification. I am not proud of that part. I ignored it because I wanted it to be nothing. The next week, Emily told me she was going to a dress fitting with her sister. That night, one of our door alerts pinged on my phone because someone had come up the front walk. I was stuck late at work, so I opened the camera app out of boredom and saw Ryan leaving the house through the side gate. He was carrying a garment bag. That should have been weird enough on its own. Instead of confronting anybody, I saved the clip and stared at it for almost 10 minutes in my office parking lot, like I could make it turn into something harmless if I looked hard enough. When I got home, Emily said Ryan had dropped off a backup suit jacket for the rehearsal dinner because mine still needed tailoring and he knew a seamstress from work. The story sounded ridiculous, but I had already been trained by months of small weirdness not to call things ridiculous too fast. So I nodded, kissed her, and went to bed feeling like I had swallowed a rock. The thing that finally broke the whole thing open was a camera I had almost forgotten existed. A few months earlier, somebody had kept stealing packages from porches in our neighborhood. I bought a couple cheap indoor cameras, more out of annoyance than paranoia, and put one in the kitchen window and one in the hallway near the front door. I mostly used them to check deliveries and make sure the dog was not eating socks. The camera in the kitchen had an audio feed that I never paid attention to. One night I was reviewing the footage because a box of decor samples had gone missing, and I heard voices in the background when I scrubbed through the recording. At first I thought it was the TV. Then I realized Emily and Ryan were in the kitchen. I was not home. I had been at the office. They did not know the camera was there, or maybe they had forgotten about it because I had never given them a reason to think I cared about the footage. I sat there in my car in the driveway with the app open on my phone and watched the timestamp from 2 nights earlier. Emily had been leaning against the counter. Ryan was standing too close. There was a long pause where they were obviously not talking about centerpieces or seating charts. Then they laughed in that low, nervous way people laugh when they know they are already too far in. I did not need the audio to understand the body language, but the audio made it worse. It made it real. I listened to the rest of it 3 times because my brain kept refusing to accept the first pass. They were not just flirting. They were not just being stupid once. They were talking like people who had been hiding something for a while and were trying to decide how much longer they could keep it buried. Emily sounded angry at Ryan for being careless. Ryan sounded annoyed that she kept pushing the wedding forward like nothing was happening. Then he said something that made my hands go cold. He said it had been a mistake and they needed to stop acting like one night had to ruin everything. Emily did not correct him. She just said they could not afford to blow up their future over guilt. That was the first time I actually felt sick. Not sad, not angry. Just sick enough that I had to get out of the car and stand in my driveway in the dark for a minute because I did not trust myself to drive anywhere. I did not go inside right away. I sat in the garage and replayed the clip until the app started buffering. Then I downloaded it. Then I backed it up to my laptop. Then I emailed it to myself from a different account. I was shaking so badly my password entry failed twice. The whole time I kept thinking maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they had kissed once. Maybe they were talking about somebody else. Maybe they were too stupid to realize how bad it sounded. Then I heard Ryan say they had already crossed the line and that one stupid mistake should not destroy the life they had all been building. That was when I knew it was not a misunderstanding. It was just the first honest thing I had heard from either of them in months. I did not confront them that night. I know that sounds strange, but once the first shock passed, I became very calm. Almost unnaturally calm. I had this weird, detached feeling like I was watching somebody else's life through a screen. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I wrote down the date, the time, and the exact cameras I had checked. Then I started building a timeline. I pulled up bank statements. I checked the wedding fund. I looked at the hotel charges again. I compared them to nights Emily said she was with her sister or with my cousin or out shopping for decor. Every time I opened a statement, I found another little thing that looked innocent if I ignored the pattern. A gas station charge in the next town when she said she was running errands across town. A restaurant bill near Ryan's apartment the same evening she told me she was with her mom. A repeated transfer from our checking account to a card I did not recognize at first. I had made a mistake with access years earlier when we were both handling some shared bills, and she knew more passwords than she should have. That was on me. I had trusted her with too much because I thought trust was the point of living like you were already married. I printed everything. I put the pages in a folder. I copied the video clip to a flash drive. Then I changed the passwords on every account I could think of. I was not trying to punish anyone yet. I was trying to make sure I did not get blindsided twice. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. That might have been the hardest part. I sat through a staff meeting discussing a scheduling mess and a vendor delay while my entire world sat in a manila folder in my backpack. I remember looking at my phone every few minutes and seeing messages from Emily about flowers and chairs, and asking whether I wanted the salmon or chicken option for the rehearsal dinner. Each little practical text made me feel more insulted than any dramatic confession would have. She was still planning a wedding with me while hiding a life behind it. By lunch, I had enough of the timeline to know the hotel charges were not random. They lined up too neatly with Ryan's days off. So did the transfer payments. So did the weird gaps in Emily's calendar. I started wondering whether they were actually using wedding money for whatever they had going on. That thought made me angry enough to stop being numb. I called my brother, who works in finance and has exactly the kind of personality that turns chaotic situations into checklists. I did not tell him everything. I just said I needed to know whether a chargeback would work if someone had been using my card without permission. He asked a few careful questions and told me to preserve every statement and every message. He also told me not to announce anything until I had something solid enough that nobody could twist it. That was good advice. I knew Emily and Ryan well enough to know they would try to turn this into some tragic misunderstanding if I gave them a chance. By the time Friday rolled around, I had enough evidence to know I was not imagining things. I also had enough evidence to know I was still missing something. The camera footage only proved they were sneaking around. It did not explain the money. It did not explain the hotel. It did not explain why Ryan had been hanging around our place so often lately, always with some excuse about helping Emily move centerpieces or pick out linens or check a vendor quote. The story started making more sense when I found a set of messages buried in a shared planning app. Emily had linked Ryan into threads that had nothing to do with him. At first, I assumed he was just helping with logistics. Then I noticed he had comments on financial items, not normal comments either. He had been asking about deposit dates and whether I had seen the latest statement. That should not have involved him at all. The biggest red flag was a note about the honeymoon. Emily and Ryan had apparently been discussing a backup plan in case something came up with the original booking. At first, I thought maybe it was about prices. Then I saw that the backup plan involved a hotel 30 minutes away from the original resort, with a longer stay and a different payment method. That was not a planner issue. That was not a family errand. That was two people trying to build an alternate story. I still did not know the full shape of it, but I knew enough to feel like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. The worst part was that I wanted to call her and ask for an explanation. Not because I thought she could explain it, because part of me still wanted to hand her one more chance to make me feel crazy instead of betrayed. I did not do that. I sat on my couch, stared at the folder on the coffee table, and realized I was not dealing with a single bad night. I was dealing with a choice. Two people had looked at me, my money, my house, and the wedding I was paying for, and decided the simplest thing was to lie to my face until after the paperwork was finished. That realization changed something in me. I stopped feeling broken and started feeling methodical. I called the venue and quietly confirmed the cancellation terms. I checked with the caterer. I called the photographer. I looked at our vendor contracts one by one and found out which deposits were refundable, which were not, and which required written notice before a certain date. I was not trying to save the wedding anymore. I was trying to save myself from getting blamed for the mess they had built. That was also when I realized I needed witnesses. Not in some dramatic legal sense, just people who would remember I had not lost my mind. I called my sister and told her I needed her at the rehearsal dinner the next night no matter what. I called my dad and said the same thing. He asked a couple questions and I could hear the worry in his breathing, but he did not push. My mom asked whether Emily was okay. I lied and said I was sorting out a scheduling issue. That lie made me feel awful, but I needed one more day to finish pulling everything together. That evening, Emily came home while I was in the office. I heard her and Ryan in the kitchen because he had apparently stopped by to drop off another box of wedding items. I stayed quiet and listened from the hallway. I know that sounds pathetic. It was not because I wanted to spy. It was because I had finally reached the stage where every new piece of information mattered. I heard them talk about the rehearsal dinner, about how tired I had been, and about how much easier it would be once everything was official. I heard enough to know they were not panicking. They were annoyed. That was almost worse. They sounded like people irritated by a delay in a process they had already mentally completed. That night I hardly slept. I kept running through possibilities. Maybe I should confront them privately. Maybe I should call everything off immediately. Maybe I should wait until after the wedding and let them expose themselves. In the end, I chose the option that felt the hardest and the cleanest. I would wait one more day, let them walk into the room believing everything was still under control, and then I would show everybody the truth at once. I spent the morning before the rehearsal dinner gathering my evidence into one folder and one flash drive. I printed the camera stills. I printed the bank pages. I printed the hotel receipts. I printed the sections of the planning app where Ryan had no business being involved. I even printed the contract from the furniture outlet that showed a charge to my card for items I never ordered. At some point, I realized I was preparing like a guy going to small claims court instead of a wedding rehearsal, and that strangely made me feel better. Paper does not lie. People do. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant with a private room attached to a bigger event space. It was one of those places where every family in town seems to use the same beige carpet and the same awkward folding chairs for every milestone. Emily arrived looking perfect. Her parents were there. My parents were there. My sister was there. Aunts and uncles and a couple of cousins came through the room carrying gifts and expecting small talk and polite laughter. Ryan showed up last. He hugged people like nothing in the world was wrong. He even slapped my shoulder and asked whether I was finally relaxing now that the wedding was almost here. I remember thinking how easy it was for him to act like the good guy. He had always been good at that. He knew how to be the helpful friend, the steady one, the guy who never caused problems. People like that can get away with a lot because nobody wants to believe they are capable of ugliness. I made it through dinner without saying much. I ate because I did not want anyone asking why I was not eating. I watched Emily keep checking her phone under the table. I watched Ryan do the same. They were trying to look normal, but they had both crossed into that stage where guilty people keep checking whether their faces are giving them away. After dinner, people started drifting around the room and taking pictures. My dad was talking to Emily's father near the dessert table. My mom was helping my sister with a tray of coffee. Ryan came over and asked if I could step into the hall with him for a second. I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to get ahead of whatever I might say. I followed him because I had already decided not to let him control the timing. The hallway outside the room was empty except for a framed wedding photo display from some other couple. Ryan started talking in that soft, measured tone people use when they are trying to sound reasonable while asking for something unreasonable. He said he knew things had been stressful. He said nobody should blow up a life over one mistake. He said Emily was scared and he was scared and this was not worth losing everything over. He did not say the exact words from the topic line because I was not interested in the exact words anymore. I was interested in what they meant. He was not sorry. He was scared of getting caught. I remember looking at him and feeling absolutely still. I had expected rage. Instead, I felt almost empty. That was the moment I knew I was not going to yell. Yelling would have been for him. Calm would be for me. I told him I had heard enough. He looked confused for half a second, then he tried to smile in that fake, apologetic way people do when they realize the other person has already solved the puzzle. He said something about me misunderstanding the context. That was when I took out my phone. I had connected it to the small speaker they were using for background music in the private room. I had tested it earlier, while pretending to check audio levels for the dinner slideshow. I had the recording queued up to the part where they were talking in my kitchen. Ryan saw the screen and immediately lost the little bit of color he had left. He moved like he was going to stop me, but I stepped back and walked into the room before he could do anything. I did not raise my voice. I just stood at the front of the room and asked everyone to stop talking for a minute. People did. That kind of silence is wild when it happens in a room full of family. You can feel every person trying to figure out whether this is a joke, a speech, or a breakdown. I pressed play. The room heard enough within 10 seconds to change forever. At first, it was just the low sound of my kitchen in the background. Then Emily's voice. Then Ryan's. Then the part where they were clearly discussing more than one bad decision. Then the part where they talked about timing, about hiding it until after the wedding, about how much easier it would be once the legal stuff was done. There was a sound in the room I will never forget, not gasping exactly, more like a collective failure to breathe. My mom covered her mouth. Emily's mother sat down very slowly. My father stared at the wall like it had personally offended him. Emily turned white so fast it looked fake. Ryan started trying to speak over the speaker, but nobody could understand him because I kept the recording going long enough for everyone to hear the part about the money and the hotel and the fact that this had not been a one-time mistake. I stopped it before it ran too long. That was enough. I looked at Emily and told her the wedding was canceled. I did not say anything clever. I did not make a speech. I just said the wedding was off and that the truth was not done yet. Then I set the phone on the table, picked up my folder and walked out of the room. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the room erupted behind me. I heard chairs scrape. I heard somebody crying. I heard Ryan trying to explain. I heard Emily's father slam his hand against something hard enough to make the whole hallway echo. I did not turn back. My sister caught up with me near the front entrance and asked whether I was okay. That question almost made me fall apart. I told her I was better than I had been an hour earlier, which was true even if I still felt like my bones had been replaced with glass. My dad walked out next. He did not say much. He just put a hand on my shoulder and stayed there until I could breathe again. That was the closest thing to support I could have asked for in that moment. I went home alone. Emily was still at the restaurant when I left. I found that out later. I did not want her in the house that night. I changed the locks the next morning. I packed her things into boxes and left them on the porch with a note telling her to coordinate pickup through my sister. I kept it practical. I did not want a fight on my front lawn. I wanted a paper trail. That turned out to matter. By the time I finished packing, Emily had already sent more texts than I cared to read. At first they were denial, then panic, then apologies, then the familiar line that it had been one terrible mistake and that nobody should destroy a future over one mistake. I did not answer. Ryan called too. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, he sounded less confident than he had in the hallway. He tried to make it sound like Emily had been upset, and the conversation was taken out of context. He tried to make it sound like the recording only caught a bad moment. He tried to make it sound like he and I could still fix things privately before anybody else had to know. That voicemail alone was enough to make me hate the phrase fix things for almost a year, because what he meant by fixing things was not repairing anything he broke. he meant hiding it better. The next few days were ugly in ordinary, unglamorous ways. I spent hours on the phone with vendors. I canceled what I could. I disputed charges I recognized. I filed a police report for the card transactions that had not been authorized. The officer I spoke with was polite but unsurprised, which somehow made it even sadder. Apparently people do stupid things with shared accounts all the time. That does not make it hurt any less when it happens to you. The bank put a temporary hold on some of the charges while they reviewed the evidence. My folder ended up being more useful than I expected. The recording helped prove that Emily had access to the accounts and had used them in ways I had not approved. The screenshots helped prove the timeline. The receipts helped prove where the money went. I learned fast that banks and police do not care much about heartbreak. They care about dates, transactions, and whether you can keep your story straight. Fortunately, my story was simple. I had paid for things. They had used things. I had not authorized certain charges. That part was easy to understand. What was harder was the emotional fallout. My mom cried in the kitchen for 2 days straight because Emily had been in our lives so long that she felt like family. Emily's mother called once and left a long voicemail that I did not return. Ryan's brother texted me to say he had no idea and that the family was embarrassed. A couple mutual friends asked whether this was really happening or whether I had made some kind of mistake. That question hurt more than I expected. Not because I blamed them for asking, because I understood why they could not immediately believe it. Ryan had always seemed like the last person who would do something this ugly. That was the whole trick. The people who least look guilty are sometimes the easiest to trust. Emily showed up 2 days later while I was at work and left a bag of her things on the porch. She tried to get through to me by reminding me of every good year we had. That almost worked. Almost. Then I checked the flash drive again and remembered she had been discussing a future with another man in my kitchen while asking me which flowers I wanted. That memory settled the argument in my head for good. I did not meet with her in person after that. My sister handled the exchange of belongings because I did not want to see her carrying the life we had built together one box at a time and try to turn it into something sad and noble. It was not noble. It was selfish and cowardly. I was done pretending otherwise. Ryan tried for one last private conversation a week later. He sent a long message asking me to meet him for coffee, man to man. I almost ignored it. Then I decided I wanted to hear what he thought could possibly be left to say. I met him in a public place during lunch because I had no interest in giving him privacy. He looked rough, not destroyed. Just the kind of rough people look when they have not slept well and finally realize consequences are real. He started with the same script. He said it had started badly and gotten out of hand. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said he knew he had been an idiot. He said Emily was overwhelmed by the wedding and they had both made one mistake they could not afford to define them forever. I let him talk. Then I asked him whether the bank transfer was also a mistake. He went still. That was when I learned the part I had not known yet. He and Emily had not just been hiding an affair. They had been using money from the wedding account and from a card attached to my name to cover deposits on a rental place they had been looking at together. Not a romantic fantasy. A real apartment. A real deposit. A real plan. They had been telling themselves they were going to sort it out after the wedding and then be honest later, because apparently lying to me until the paperwork was done was their version of mercy. He looked almost offended when I asked whether he had really thought I would never find out. His answer was not much of an answer. He said they thought once things were official, emotions would settle and nobody would have to get hurt as much. That was the moment I realized how little respect either of them had for me. Not enough to tell the truth. Not enough to stop. Not enough to consider that I was a person and not just a background system for their bad decisions. I told him the bank was already reviewing the charges. I told him I had the recording and the receipts. I told him I would be keeping every document until the fraud review was done. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he could not. For the first time since this started, I saw panic instead of rehearsed regret. That felt like a terrible kind of justice, not satisfying, just accurate. The bank eventually reversed a chunk of the unauthorized charges after requesting the evidence. I did lose some money on non-refundable deposits, but not nearly as much as I would have if I had waited another week. A few vendors were decent about it once I explained that the wedding had been canceled due to fraud and not a simple breakup. A couple were not decent at all. One florist acted like I should have been more careful. I still remember how angry that made me, as if being cheated on and financially manipulated was some kind of scheduling issue. I wrote detailed complaints about the vendors who gave me a hard time and moved on. I did not have the energy to punish everyone who was rude. I just wanted my money back where possible and my life back wherever else. The house became quiet in a way I had not expected. Emily had left behind a lot of little things. Hair ties in the bathroom drawer, a mug with a cracked handle, a sweater on the back of a chair, a stupid decorative pillow she insisted on buying because it matched nothing and somehow still made the couch look better. It was strange how a person can leave a house and yet keep showing up in corners of it. I spent a full weekend boxing up the leftovers and putting them in storage. I also found things I had not known to look for: receipts, a duplicate key I had never given her, a handwritten list with names and amounts that looked very much like a private budget between her and Ryan. Seeing that list made my stomach turn. That was the moment I understood they had been more organized than I had given them credit for. This had not been some sudden lapse. It had been managed. That realization hurt in a different way. It meant I had not just been unlucky, I had been underestimated. The part I am still weirdly proud of is that I never let myself turn into a wreck in front of the people who mattered. I broke down in the shower. I did not break down in front of my parents. I got angry in my truck. I did not scream at the bank teller. I cried over a box of wedding invitations in my garage one night and then got up and finished the paperwork. I called the police when the card dispute required it. I called my lawyer cousin for a one-time consult about the house and the engagement ring. I changed the passwords again. I kept the records. That boring, annoying discipline ended up being the reason I was able to move forward without getting buried. The engagement ring became a whole separate mess. Emily wanted to return it through her brother so she would not have to see me. I was fine with that. My aunt had warned me years earlier that rings become emotional landmines the second a wedding falls apart, and she was right. The ring itself was still under the jeweler's buyback window if I returned it quickly enough, which I did. That money helped cover some of the wedding losses. It did not fix what happened, but it made the financial part less ugly. My parents handled the social fallout better than I expected. At first, they were furious. Then they were sad. Then they got practical. My mom started helping me call relatives to explain what had happened without turning it into gossip. My dad went with me to drop off a few canceled items at a storage locker Emily had used for decor. Neither of them asked me to forgive anybody. That mattered more than they probably realized. I have seen too many people get pressured into being the bigger person before they are done being the injured one. Nobody asked that of me. A month later, the venue sent back a partial refund because I had canceled early enough for them to rebook the date. That was a small miracle. The photographer was unexpectedly kind and refunded more than his contract required because he said he did not feel right keeping money for a wedding that had been destroyed by cheating and theft. I still remember staring at his email for a minute, trying not to get emotional about a stranger being decent to me. The caterer kept part of the deposit, which I did not argue. Business is business. At least that was honest. Ryan disappeared from our mutual group chats. Emily did too. A few friends quietly drifted back once the recording proved this had not been a misunderstanding. A couple never said anything directly, but I could tell they had been waiting to see whether I would act crazy or not. I guess they expected me to explode. Instead, I became the person who kept showing evidence. That probably disappointed them. It also helped me. The weirdest part was how fast the story changed once people heard the recording. Before that, Emily and Ryan had already started telling a softer version of events to whoever would listen. They framed it like I had become obsessed with details and spiraled over stress. That did not last long once the audio and bank records started circulating among the people who mattered. Truth does not need to be flashy. It just needs to be consistent. And mine was. A few weeks after the wedding would have happened, I got a call from the bank asking about one last disputed charge tied to the apartment deposit Ryan and Emily had tried to cover. The charge had been made from an account I recognized but had never approved for that purpose. The bank wanted a written statement. I gave them one. The refund eventually came through. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to close that chapter properly. I also got a letter saying the police had completed their review and had no reason to pursue anything further because the bank had resolved the fraudulent portions through the dispute process. That was fine with me. I was never trying to send anyone to jail. I just did not want to be the guy who got lied to, stolen from, and then left holding the bill because he was too embarrassed to say anything. I got out ahead of it. That was the win. The emotional part took longer. I did not date for a while. I did not want to be one of those people who immediately tries to prove they are still desirable by jumping into the next relationship. I was too tired for that. I spent evenings at the gym, working late, helping my sister move, and sitting on my back porch with the dog while the house got quieter and less haunted. Some nights I still replayed the kitchen footage in my head, not because I wanted to punish myself, because my brain kept wanting to go back and ask whether there had been some other version of the last year where I could have noticed sooner. Maybe there was. Maybe I did miss things. I know I did. I ignored the phone face down on the table. I ignored the weird hotel charges the first time. I ignored the too neat explanations because I trusted people who had not earned that level of trust anymore. That part embarrassed me. But embarrassment is easier to survive than denial. At least embarrassment tells the truth. 3 months later, I ran into one of Emily's cousins at a grocery store. She looked uncomfortable at first, then told me she had only recently found out the full story. She said Emily had told different relatives different versions, but the recording and the bank dispute had stopped most of the excuses from spreading. That was when I realized something I had not thought about much. People were not just judging the cheating. They were judging the attempt to cover it up. The secrecy had made everything uglier. If Emily had been honest from the start, the whole thing would still have hurt, but at least it would not have turned into fraud and a financial mess. I do not think she ever understood that. Or maybe she did and just did not care. I never got a satisfying explanation from her, and at this point I do not think one exists. Sometimes people do cruel things because they think they will get away with them. Sometimes they do them because they assume you will be too embarrassed to call them out. Sometimes they convince themselves that if the future looks good enough, the lies will eventually count as mercy. That is not how any of this works. A few weeks after that grocery store encounter, I sat down with my dad and went through the last of the cancellation paperwork. He told me he was proud of how I handled it. That might sound small, but it hit me hard because my dad is not the kind of man who throws around praise when things are falling apart. He meant it. He said I had stayed calm, kept records, and refused to let other people rewrite reality for me. That was probably the nicest thing anyone could have said about the whole disaster. By then I had started sleeping better. Not great, better. The house no longer felt like a stage set built around somebody else's lie. I repainted the guest room. I put away the wedding registry printout. I threw away the sample invitations. I kept one envelope in a drawer because I guess I needed proof that the life I thought I was building had really existed for a while, even if it died ugly. A year later, I can say the thing that still bothers me most is not the cheating itself. It is the casual entitlement, the shrug. The way Ryan acted like one mistake should be enough for me to swallow everything else. The way both of them seemed to think they could manage the fallout if they just kept smiling long enough. That is what the recording exposed, not just the affair, the confidence, the assumption that I would be easier to manipulate than I was. They were wrong. I am still not the kind of man who enjoys a fight. I never wanted revenge. I wanted the truth on paper. I wanted my money protected. I wanted my name clear. I wanted every person in that room to understand that what happened was not a misunderstanding, not a bad joke, and not a noble sacrifice for love. It was a lie. And once I proved it, the whole house of cards came down faster than either of them expected. I think that is why I ended up in a stronger position. Not because I was clever in some dramatic way, because I was patient. Because I kept the recording. Because I kept the statements. Because I did not let myself be rushed into a messy confrontation before I had enough proof to stand on. The wedding never happened. The truth did. And once it did, it changed everything I had been scared to lose. Emily moved out of the area a few months later, or at least that is what I was told by someone who still had contact with her family. Ryan lost a lot of his social circle. Not because everybody suddenly became perfect, but because people remembered what they heard in that room and they could not unhear it. As for me, I kept my house. I kept my money that could be recovered. I kept my dignity, which is not something you realize you are fighting for until someone tries to take it and dress the theft up as mercy. I also kept one other thing, my ability to trust evidence over panic. That has come in handy more than once since then. A year ago, I thought my life was ending because two people I loved had lied to me. Now I know it was the start of a much quieter, better life built on things that actually hold up. The weirdest part is that I am grateful for the recording. Not because I wanted the pain. Because without it, I might still be telling myself the story they wanted me to believe. And I would rather have the truth hurt me than let a lie run my life.